On this episode of Locked On Grizzlies, we are talking NBA draft crushes and guys that we wouldn't touch with a 10-foot pole. That's right, Damichael and I have cultivated a carefully curated list of prospects to both wine and dine and get the heck out of Dodge as they come through Memphis for workouts. Who would we take? Plus, we remember the legendary Bill Walton. All that and more on a pretty impactful episode of Locked On Grizzlies. Let's lock in.
You are Locked On Grizzlies, your daily Memphis Grizzlies podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello once again, everyone. I am Joe Mullinax. I am joined by Damichael Cole. The dynamic duo rides once more. It is Locked On Grizzlies on this fantastic Wednesday. Thank you so much for joining us, however you are checking out the podcast. Today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. We are free and available wherever you get Locked On Grizzlies and wherever you get podcasts. YouTube, Apple, Spotify, Amazon. Like, comment, rate, review, subscribe. Hopefully you're making us a part of your NBA and Memphis Grizzlies content consumption each and every time an episode drops. As the month of May ends and June approaches, that means the NBA draft is getting closer and closer, and that's going to be one of our main focuses on today's episode. As I mentioned a moment ago, I am joined by my co-host, Damichael Cole of the Commercial Appeal there in Memphis, Tennessee, award-winning beat writer for covering the Memphis Grizzlies for the Commercial Appeal. Damichael, it is wonderful to be back with you. I trust that you had a wonderful Memorial Day holiday, a chance to hang out with family and friends, and hopefully you got some good food at the cookout and that sort of thing.
Yes. All of it. I went to Ohio. I went to Cedar Point. You been there to the?
I have never been to Cedar Point, but that is a lot of fun. I've heard that is a phenomenal amusement park.
I'm a big time roller coaster guy. And,
there you go.
93 miles per hour with inversions and
nice.
Flying all around the air. I love that type of stuff. But you know what? Fun time down there at Cedar Point with a couple friends. Came back Monday night, went straight to my mom's house. Got some of those barbecue. Got a good barbecue over there. Some spaghetti on the side. All that good stuff. But
goodness gracious.
But now it's time to talk some Grizzlies.
You're making me hungry just hearing it, partner. Yeah, it was a wonderful Memorial Day weekend here as well, and I'm glad to hear that you had such great time. And, it's great to be back with our wonderful listeners and viewers over on YouTube for another episode of Locked On Grizzlies. And again, the NBA draft is approaching. Damichael felt like a good time to kind of revisit that, and not just revisit the draft itself, but finally plant our flag on a couple of islands. Some early NBA draft crushes. Later on in the show, we'll talk about guys that we don't want to draft, and it feels a little early for that, a few weeks until the draft occurs. But there's some that, I'm comfortable saying I'm not interested in having them around. And I think you can agree. Maybe our names will be a little bit different, but we're ready to plant some flags, as I said a moment ago, and then we'll close out the show talking about the legendary Bill Walton and the growing trend of having multiple Hall of Fame careers. And I'll explain what I mean by that at the end of the program. But let's start with NBA draft crushes. And Damichael, the floor will be yours. I'll happily cede the mic to you and listen to all the different types of guys that you think the Memphis Grizzlies should draft that aren't centers, so I can get slightly annoyed with your complete ignoring a massive need for the Memphis Grizzlies.
No, I'm not ignoring the need for the Grizzlies show because you listened to the episode last week where
I listened to every episode.
I made the argument, and Joe, I think the funny part is I think you would agree with this, but our ways of getting there probably a little bit different. But I think you would agree that you've covered this team all these years. You can't think of one year since Joe Mullinax has been following the Grizzlies where they've been a sharp shooting, efficient 3-point team.
Literally never.
One. It's never.
I would love for them to be sharp shooting 3-point team. It's something that makes me very sad when they're not, which has literally been the last 11 or so years I've covered the team.
And if you look at this draft, for all the things that it doesn't have, you got Reed Shepherd, who just shot 52% from 3-point range in college basketball. You got Dalton Connett, who, despite being a number one option for the Tennessee Vols team, averaged over 20 points per game and efficiently shot the basketball from 3-point range. That's a guy. I'll start with Dalton Connect. I got a big that I like too, but I'm gonna let you go next as well. I'll start with him from the standpoint of shooting is just as important as this whole big thing. Like we're centering the conversation around the bigs, right? But at the same time, they need shooting. Like you can't just keep saying, "Oh, this guy's gonna take a leap as a shooter. This guy's gonna take a leap as a shooter," because we haven't seen it happen enough. I mean, the Grizzlies, as I said, the last time they were top 10 in the NBA in three-point shooting percentage was 2006, 2007. That's how long it's been. Like,
yeah, that's a long time. Damichael, you weren't even alive back then.
I wasn't. But and Joe, you were singing your ABCs back then. Remember that was
2006, 2007. I was a sophomore and junior in college.
Yeah. I don't know what I was doing then. Maybe third grade, maybe fourth grade, somewhere around there. But but the point is, the Grizzlies need to emphasize the need for shooting just as much. And there's reason to believe that's the case. You look at the last couple drafts, a big part of drafting those guys, Tarek Biberovic, shooting. Even the year before when they drafted Vince Williams, Kennedy Chandler, David Riley, Jake LaRavia. We haven't seen the results, show it. But the emphasis in that draft was getting guys who were efficient three-point shooters in college, which all those players were.
Massively important. Dalton Connect would absolutely be on my list. I think I've talked about Connect before in terms of being a guy you can plug him in right now. Does he have a high ceiling compared to some of these other guys? Like a Reed Shepherd, right? Maybe Reed Shepherd has a higher ceiling. I'm willing to cede that. The Grizzlies shouldn't give a damn. Pardon my language. I know we're a family-friendly show. I'm a little fired up on this Wednesday because I'm really excited about my do not draft list that we'll talk about later on in the program. But Dalton Connect is, for all his flaws in terms of his draft age, that's probably the biggest knock on him. Dude shoots the lights out with the basketball. He's a scorer of the rock. He's a guy that, if you subscribe to the starting G.G. Jackson philosophy, which we'll talk more about on a later episode, he could be that bench bucket getter for sure, coming in immediately. He has a 6'9" wingspan, which is exciting. He has longer arms than he is tall. So in terms of defense, he may have what he might lack laterally. He should be able to make up for some in other spaces. I sign off on the Dalton Connect. That would be totally cool with me. A couple of names that I like, partner. Deron Holmes II. This is a late first round guy out of Dayton. I like how he checks a lot of the analytic boxes, right? He does a lot of things offensively that are a little bit different. Memphis checks a lot of boxes needing offensive production. And I think that he's a guy, if you're looking for a replacement for Santi Aldama, right? This guy should shoot, 33 to 35% from three in the pros. He is an offensive dynamo, really can help on that end of the floor in particular. As a reserve big, you can do a lot worse. I don't necessarily like him at 9. I like him as a guy that maybe they trade back into the first round to try to secure if they go that route. And then as a second round guy, I have to be a bit of a homer here to Michael. I'm a big
which one of those UVA guys you about to throw out?
Virginia Cavaliers guy. I can't argue reasonably for Ryan Dunn because he doesn't help the Grizzlies in any way. But Reese Beekman, right? Reese Beekman is a guy, maybe a late second round flyer. He is someone who is similar to Tyus Jones in terms of his assist to turnover ratio. He's a solid defender. He's a really good distributor of the basketball. He has a almost 6'7" wingspan. So he's a guy that maybe can't play with Ja, spoiler alert, what I'm going to talk about later. But again, if you are trying to fill a two-way contract, maybe you convert Scottie Pippen or something happens along the ways with that, I think he checks boxes as a second-round crush of mine that could do some things at the point guard position if they're trying to fill that void. So those would be my two.
I got one more.
Okay.
And Joe, let me say this. We spent a lot of time talking about Zach Edey, Donovan Clingan at center.
Yeah.
What if I said there's another center out there that I would be comfortable taking at 9? I would be comfortable. If it's the option that the Grizzlies go with, I would be comfortable.
I think I know where you're going with this.
And that guy is Khalil Ware out of Indiana, sophomore. He played his freshman year at Oregon. Freshman year didn't go really well. Went into a different opportunity, makes Big Ten all defensive team. And he's doing everything. He shot the basketball over 42% from 3-point range, shot over 58% from the field overall, rim running big, capable shooter. And when I look at him, and this is kind of a lazy comparison because I got to dive a little bit more into it. But when you just look at him and you just watch glimpses of what he's doing when he's at his best, you see Derek Lively. That's who you see. And the shooting is a little bit better and whatnot, but the ability to protect the rim, the size and things like that. I think the way Derek Lively has performed in the playoffs kind of helps a guy like that in his draft stock status because it makes you feel like that's the type of guy that can be ready to play right next season. Joe Mullinax says, are we trying to win a championship or not?
I do say that.
That is a prospect. I mean, the Dallas Mavericks are trying to win a championship, and they went and got Derek Lively, and he has shifted the way that front court is looked at. And then now about what our guy Rafael Barlow said, locked on draft expert as well. He made a post on X yesterday as well, and I've said a few things in the past about Khalil Ware, but when Rafael says it, I think you got to pay a little bit more extra attention to it because this is the same guy. If you remember, we talked about Locked On Grizzlies, same guy who said G.G. Jackson should have been a lottery pick last season, and people were like, "What?" But he said
was easily the most prominent voice hyping up G.G. Jackson. Not even close.
Not even close. He said yesterday, in a draft full of uncertainty, I don't know why a 7-footer who averaged 16, 10, and 2 blocks while shooting 58% from the floor and 42% from 3 isn't considered a lock for the lottery. He doesn't know. I don't either. I think this is a guy. He's my second draft crush, Joe.
I think that it comes down to we're at the point of the process where we overthink things. Yeah. I continue to see more and more people talking themselves out of Donovan Clingan, which is just hilarious to me. Like he didn't dominate Illinois, who is one of the best offensive teams in the country, and put up the best defensive showing of any big in the entire NCAA last season. If you don't love Clingan, I get it. There's flaws to his game, the foot injury question. But to act like he sucks is just absurd to me. Ware,
it's the way people cope around
here. Yeah, well, I think I'd be fine with Ware. I don't disagree with that. I think, we'll talk about maybe a big that you wouldn't be as excited about coming up next. But I think Ware would be fine. And I don't disagree with picking him at 9. I want to stress, Clingan is the guy that I would go with as long as they address it. Whether it's the draft, whether it's free agency, and we've heard Kleiman time and again, Zach Kleiman, Grizzlies GM, say we're going to address the big man situation. Yep. I don't necessarily care who they get, and that's being truthful. I can't think there's lots of rumors, and we've talked a little bit about Jared Allen for Marcus Smart, Brooke Lopez for Marcus Smart, if that was a route that they went. I don't necessarily think that's bad either. As long as it's addressed, I don't necessarily know that there's a wrong answer. I know what I would prefer. But I think that one of the positives of the fluidity of this draft is there's a lot of guys you can talk yourself into. And Ware, I'm with you. I would be okay with him even at 9. I think that's a fair point. What do you guys think? Let us know in the comments. Do you agree with Damichael's list, my list? How are you feeling about our draft crushes? Coming up next, we're going to see if it's too soon to talk guys that we wouldn't touch with a 10-foot pole. But I've got a type that I'm very much not feeling this go round. And I know Damichael has a couple of names on his list as well. We'll talk about those next here on Locked On Grizzlies. But first, this episode of Locked On Grizzlies is brought to you by Gametime. I'm excited for the NBA Finals. I'm sure you're excited for the NBA Finals. I know a hooper like Damichael Cole is excited for the NBA Finals. How cool would it be to go to a game? Am I right? It'd be phenomenal. Well, the Gametime app can help make that a reality for you. You can go to upcoming NBA Finals games as well as any other high-profile event with Gametime. Getting last-minute tickets through Flash and Zone deals. You can get great views from every seat in the venue, a panoramic view from the seat in the app before you buy it. And then the lowest price guarantee, Gametime will credit you 110% of the difference. That is a phenomenal promise that only Gametime and their app makes. Take the guesswork out of buying NBA Finals tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Download Gametime app today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Check them out now. What are you waiting for? We come back here on Locked On Grizzlies. We're talking guys we aren't interested in as much in the NBA draft. Stick with us. Welcome back to this episode of Locked On Grizzlies. I am Joe Mullinax, joined by Damichael Cole. Damichael, we're going to jump right in and talk about our do not draft list. And I want to start off by saying mine is not so much a player as it is a specific type of player.
Same here.
You mentioned Reed Sheppard earlier in the show, and he's a guy who shot the lights out even better than Dalton Connect. You know, as long as it wasn't the Oakland Grizzlies, Reed Sheppard was one of the best players in college basketball this past season. Rob Dillingham, another guy who completely cost me my NCAA tournament bracket because I thought 2 NBA guards would lead them to the final or to the NBA championship, and they lost again to the Oakland Grizzlies. So that guy is another one. I'm talking size compared to wingspan and whether or not they can play with Ja Morant. If they can't play with Ja Morant, like I don't think Sheppard and Dillingham can, they're out. The great irony of Stephon Castle, who is apparently telling teams he only wants to go to places where he can be the starting point guard, which obviously is not going to happen at Memphis. But he's almost 6'7", partner. He would be a phenomenal fit next to Ja Morant because of his size at almost 6'7", 6'9" wingspan, the ability to handle the basketball. On the flip side of that, take a player, Devin Carter. I believe Anthony Carter is the name of the assistant coach. There's lots of smoke to that fire, potentially. The Grizzlies loving Devin Carter. Devin Carter is only 6'3", 6'4", but he's got a wingspan that's about 6'9". That's about a 5-inch difference.
Melton, yeah.
In theory, that is a guy that can play next to Ja Morant. Whereas an Isaiah Collier, who's been moving up draft boards, about 6'4" with about a 6'5" wingspan. So for me, I'm cool with taking another ball handler, another guy that can score the ball off the dribble. I understand the need for that, and you correctly called it last offseason, partner, the need for that for the roster. I'm cool with that. But it needs to be guys that have the size that can play next to Ja. I am not interested using a lottery pick in particular on a backup point guard. It has to be a guard that can fit both parts, and part of that is the physical size and length to defend other players that Ja Morant can't.
Let me make this part make sense because I'm about to twist the brains of some people a little bit.
Ooh, galaxy brain. I like it.
Michael, what are you saying? But just stick with me. I think Kyle Filipowski is going to be a solid NBA player.
Ooh.
But I don't think he's a fit for the Memphis Grizzlies.
Interesting.
And when I say solid NBA player, I think he has, you look at the way he scores the basketball. He has NBA stuff, fadeaway, turnaround, footwork. He has it. But the Grizzlies don't need any of that. The Grizzlies don't care for any of that. The Grizzlies need someone who's going to rebound the heck out of the ball, who's going to defend at a high level. If you look at Kyle Filipowski from this season, last season at Duke, the physical centers tended to give him, some problems. Memphis doesn't need those type of guys. He is the type of player, the reason I'm using him is because he's the type of player in these settings, these workout settings, he's going to wow some teams. Some teams might look at him and say, oh, some Lauri Markkanen or some Porzingis type stuff that you're going to see, right? Like, he's a smooth 7-footer who has the jump shot, who has the, the footwork and things like that. But at the end of the day, when you put him on the floor, you go back to Duke, you watch him, struggle against, PJ Hall, at Clemson. You watch him struggle against Armando Bacot, at North Carolina and things like that. And you wonder, how would that project at the NBA level for a team like the Memphis Grizzlies, who in particular need a physical big? That's what they need more than anything. Jaren Jackson Jr. has really improved his physicality and has turned into a very physical player of his own. But there's a reason me and you have talked mostly about them needing to get more of a center type of player than a 4, where Jaren's going to be playing the 5. And I think if those two share the floor together, you're looking at Kyle Filipowski more as your 4 and Jaren as your 5. And offensively, it works. But he's on my do not draft list right now. And I think at the end of the day, there's a lot of overlap there between he and Santi Aldama from a physicality standpoint, from the shooting standpoint, all of it. And that's not what the Grizzlies need. You need to be eyeing something different. Hence Dalton Connect earlier on my crush list. Hence Khalil Ware on my crush list. Those are two players. One's a 7-foot rim runner who's going to protect the rim and shoot. The other is probably going to walk into the NBA as an above average 3-point shooter. Kyle Filipowski would come on the roster and give you what you already have, and his weaknesses would be similar to those that you already have. So he would probably improve the team from a talent standpoint, which is why I said I'm going to twist the brains a little bit, because you add him, the team is more talented for sure. But are they better? As Joe Mullinax says, are they getting closer to winning a championship? I don't think that's the case.
I would agree. I said earlier in the show that as long as they address the big man situation, I'm cool. The true big man situation, I think you nailed it. Yeah, I was just going off on a tangent about wingspan. Filipowski has a negative wingspan.
Yeah.
He's 7 foot tall with a 6'10.5" wingspan. And I'm getting all these numbers from Tankathon, by the way. And obviously they come out from the NBA Combine and those sorts of places. I'm with you on Filipowski. I think they could make it work, but it's an investment in Jaren at the 5. Like, I think that Filipowski would be a Santi replacement if you don't want to pay him. And that's not a pressing need. You have Santi Aldama, at least for one more year. He's there. You don't need that. You need a bench bucket getter. You need especially a true legitimate big. Filipowski's not that. So let Damichael know how you're feeling, and let me know how you're feeling in the comments. Do you agree with me hating on these guards that don't have long wingspans? Do you agree? It's similar for Filipowski with Damichael.
I think we both went archetype. Yeah.
Yeah. The Grizzlies have their stars. Like, that's the biggest thing.
It's all about
obviously
those guys.
This draft doesn't have a superstar. You know, when Alex Sarr is the projected number 1 pick, or Nikola Topic, or whoever the case might be, and these guys are getting comps to Jaren Jackson Jr., Jaren Jackson Jr. might be the 3rd best player on the Grizzlies. So you're not looking at a LeBron James type draft or an Anthony Edwards type draft, but there could be really good role players in this draft. I think that from all across the first round.
Needle movers.
Absolutely. Guys that can help a team like Memphis win now. That's possible. In
Brandon Podziemski, right, Joe?
And AirPods. That would have been a great pick a year ago. But I think that, obviously I'm a big Desmond Bane guy, and Bane doesn't check that wingspan box, so I'm being a bit hypocritical. But Bane has proven his elite basketball skill, right? It's about finding guys that can cover up what Bane isn't able to do physically. That's what I'm most concerned about. And it sounds like Damichael, again, as is usual with us, partner, we kind of take different paths to get to the same.
But we get to the same destination.
Yeah, absolutely. Different roads to the same spot. When we come back here on Locked On Grizzlies, we're going to talk about Bill Walton, his fascinating life in more ways than one. But I want to remind you about Locked On Sports Today, the first ever 24/7 streaming channel over on YouTube. You'll notice Damichael and I not yelling at each other, not getting mad at one another, not trying to speak over one another. That's because this isn't ESPN. It's not Fox Sports. This is a place where you come for Memphis Grizzlies basketball analysis. The good news is, for just about every team across all the major professional sports in America, you can find that with the Locked On Podcast Network. And they have started summarizing the best episodes of the day, or the most prevalent or relevant episodes of the day, over on Locked On Sports Today. So go check it out. They also have Locked On NBA, Locked On NFL, Locked On NHL, all those different types of shows, in addition to the great team-specific podcasts like Locked On Grizzlies. Check it out over on YouTube. It's also on Amazon Fire TV under the free channels TV part of the app. Locked On Sports Today, give them a look. When we come back here on Locked On Grizzlies, remembering the great Bill Walton. Stick with us. Welcome back to Locked On Grizzlies. I am Joe Mullinax, closing out this Wednesday edition of Locked On Grizzlies with my tremendous partner, Damichael Cole. It's been fun talking NBA draft prospects. Again, let us know in the comments if you're with us or against us here. Damichael and I are, like we talked about a moment ago, we're on the same end game, but we're taking different roads to that end game, it sounds like, with the draft approaching. Let us know if you agree or disagree with our philosophy. But we're going to break away from the draft for the end of the program here and talk about Bill Walton, who before the show, Damichael and I always talk, whether it's in text or, a quick chat before we record. And when I brought up the idea of talking about Bill Walton, it fascinates me as the game gets older, the game of basketball, sports in general, really. But this is a basketball podcast. As basketball gets older, as media advances and gets older, you see more and more guys like Bill Walton who have legendary careers in numerous ways, right? Because how many kids today, how many Damichael Coles, you're not a kid, but you understand my point, how many younger people that consume basketball look at Bill Walton and do not know that man won 2 college basketball championships and 2 NBA championships with 2 different teams. How many people don't know that he is legitimately one of the best big men in the history of the game of basketball? They just see him as the goofy guy that was an awesome commentator on ESPN or NBA on NBC, which is true. He was an awesome commentator and he was goofy. He took off his shirt on live television and I love the Grateful Dead. All those sorts of things. I think he even talked about shrooms on one episode or on one broadcast. But he was genuine and he was legitimately himself and he was unapologetically himself, which is so rare in today's society. He made a legendary broadcasting career after his legendary playing career. And for me, Damichael, the Grizzlies comp is Brevin Knight, because as someone who came into the Grizzlies not late, but in the middle, right?
Yeah.
I did my Griztory research as I became a fan, and I realized very quickly that Brevin Knight was a successful player for the Grizzlies and obviously elsewhere in the NBA. In addition to the work that he did, it was him and I'm having a brain fart, and I apologize for that. Sean Toohey. There we go.
Sean Toohey,
It was him and Sean Toohey that split it at first when I first started watching the team. And then as time went on, because Brevin was 10 times better than Sean Toohey, it just became Brevin's job, right? And there were other things that went into that we don't need to go down. But my point is, if you're a young Grizzlies fan, you think of Pete Pranica and Brevin Knight and how awesome they are as a broadcast duo. I enjoy watching those games all the time. And how many of them don't know that he was a good NBA player? Not like Bill Walton, but again, I'm making the point. Walton is a wonderful reminder of how, as the game evolves, players are capable of reinventing themselves. Like Charles Barkley will probably be the next great example of that. How they reinvent themselves in their careers, how they find a new niche and develop. Walton was, in my opinion, and Barkley is unique in his own way. Walton was the most unique example of that, to take his personality and apply it in a way that not only was he quirky and enjoyable to watch on television, but he also, I think it was Rick Carlisle who talked before the Indiana Pacers Boston Celtics Game 4 that the Celtics won on their way to the finals. He talked about being on a text thread with the 86 Celtics team and just how much they loved Bill Walton and how phenomenal of a winner he was. I think Red Auerbach said, "I have never coached a better winning player than Bill Walton." Larry Bird was on that team. You know what I'm saying? I think that it's so interesting, and I know I'm rambling a bit, but it's just one of the parts of fandom and sports fandom that I enjoy, how these players are able to reinvent themselves as their lives and careers evolve. To me, Bill Walton's one of the best examples of that.
That's a great point. And I'm just thinking of so many guys who kind of, went down that path, as you said, pretty much the last 20, 30 years, or so. But Shannon Sharpe is one that comes to mind.
Great example.
When you watch him now, you kind of get lost in the fact that this is a Hall of Fame tight end.
Legitimately one of the best tight ends in the history of football. Play.
Yeah, exactly. But to switch the tones a little bit here, kind of aligning with what you said, most of my life when I think of Bill Walton, it is that. It's the quirkiness. It's the, watching the Pac-12 games and trying not to fall asleep and then just hearing
ESPN After Dark.
You're falling asleep, then you hear Bill Walton say something. You're like, wait, what did he just say? You lock back in real quick while you're trying to fall asleep and those type things. But alongside of that, barbershop talk is big in Memphis. Barbershop talk is big a lot of places. And when I think of, I always got to localize it, Joe. And there's a local angle here with Bill Walton. And I remember, like I say, barbershop talk is huge in Memphis. And one thing about Memphis, I grew up hearing all the time from the old heads and things like that, is Memphis State. And, they're the University of Memphis Tigers now. So in my time, I watched the University of Memphis. The old heads some of them say Memphis State. And one game, they talk about 85 and they talk about 73. And 73 was Bill Walton, 21 of 22 from the field against the Memphis State Tigers, national championship game, 44 points. Tell you what, you talk about how he's remembered, widely renowned as this announcer and things like that. And he should be, for what he did there. But who absolutely will not ever forget the player and how dominant he was. It's the people of Memphis, Tennessee, because they saw it in 73 against that UCLA team. Bill walked 21 of 22 from the field. Pretty much single-handedly put UCLA on his back to defeat Memphis State in that national championship game.
Just a phenomenal basketball player, a phenomenal human being. All the stories coming out about him in the last couple of days, really special stuff. So to everybody that loved Bill Walton, that knew Bill Walton, we send you our thoughts. Anybody that respected him, like myself and Damichael, obviously will continue to be influenced, not just by him as a broadcaster, but his amazing playing career, both in college and the pros. That's it for this episode of Locked On Grizzlies. The next time we're together, it'll be a Thursday edition of the show. You know, more and more there's rumblings about Gigi as the starter, and I've already kind of planted my flag on him as the sixth man. Damichael, maybe we're wavering a bit. Maybe we're, Marcus Smart versus Gigi, how the starting lineup would have to play differently, maybe. Might be an angle we can take. There's lots of different ways we can attack that question and others going into our Thursday show. Yeah,
looking forward to it. This is a big summer, for guys like Gigi and whatnot. But there's been a lot of talk about, we touched on the topic a little bit, with this trade stuff and all that. And people are really kind of diving into this whole Marcus Smart conversation and whatnot. Maybe that's something we look at as well.
I like it. We can take a couple of different angles with that on our Thursday show. So make sure you're checking that out and hanging out with us on Thursday. Thank you so much for hanging out with us on this episode of Locked On Grizzlies. Like, comment, rate, review, subscribe, wherever you get podcasts, Apple, Amazon, Spotify, YouTube. We're proud members of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team each and every day and each and every time an episode drops for Locked On Grizzlies. Hope you are with us checking it out. Go check out Locked On Sports Today right now as the episode ends for us. Go see what's streaming on YouTube, the first of its kind, 24/7 streaming sports channel on YouTube. Check it out on Amazon Fire as well. Big fans of that. And I'm a big fan of you, dear listener, dear viewer, and I know Damichael Cole is as well. Thank you so much for making us a part of your Memphis Grizzlies and NBA content consumption experience. For Damichael, I'm Joe. We'll catch you on Thursday, Grizzlies fans. Make sure that you are with us each and every time an episode of Locked On Grizzlies drops. Have a good one.